welcome to Pink Salt Shed TV. I'm Kate Salter. Please do subscribe to the channel by hitting the little red button on the bottom right hand corner of your screen. Right, well, I hope you all had a really lovely weekend. It all feels a bit different today because of course the clocks changed over the weekend, so we're a bit darker this morning, but it already feels just that little bit more hint of spring, doesn't it? The birds were singing almost a different song this morning, either that or I was just tuning into them a bit more. But hey, we're now turning our attentions to all things a little bit more outdoors, and especially because we are now allowed to mix outdoors, I believe. I won't say anything about what my take is on what we're allowed to do, just in case it is just a little bit skewed and not quite right. But I do believe we can see people outdoors, not just one. So that's quite exciting, actually. Feels as though we can all unfurl a little bit. Right, well, today we're talking about outside. We're talking about gardens. Now, whether you've got acres, whether you've got a little postage stamp, maybe a bit more, maybe an allotment, oh my goodness, or whether you've just got a windowsill and a little few indoor plants, we're talking about all of these things today. We might not get everything covered because, you know, the great outdoors is a great big subject, but we've got Ian from Brennan Smith Gardens to talk to us because he's the man who knows. I suppose we all probably think we all probably think we know a little bit less than we do about gardens. Get us all talking. We probably all know something that, you know, advice and hints and tips we can give each other. But I'd rather get somebody who does actually know what they're talking about to talk to us this morning about what we can be doing now, how we prepare our gardens and how we can get the best out of them this summer. So please welcome Ian. Morning, Ian.
Good morning, Kate. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome.
Let's kick off with tell us what you know about lawns.
Lawns.
Yes.
Yes. Everybody thinks lawns are low maintenance,
Ooh.
and you'd be very, very wrong.
Well, mine's
I
low
think,
maintenance. We've got AstroTurf. But then
uh,
saying that, it becomes more high maintenance when you drop barbecue coals on it. That's what happens to a low maintenance lawn. But they're great for when you've got dogs. Anyhow, I
uh,
digress. Sorry.
absolutely. I think as a professional gardener, I'm almost contractually obliged to diss AstroTurf,
Yeah,
but in the right place, it can be a perfectly practical and functional material.
we have dogs.
Exactly. I think the thing to remember about lawns is that it's actually millions and millions of individual grass plants. So you need to treat a lawn exactly as you would plants that are grown in a herbaceous border or
Okay.
anywhere other part of the garden, because you're looking after the plant. So you have to look after the soil beneath the plant
Yeah.
if that plant is going to be healthy. And
Never really
a
thought.
lot of lawn problems come from problems with the soil underneath the lawn, not the lawn itself.
So should we feed our lawn?
Yes, at the right time and with the right feeds.
Okay.
So from probably around now through to high summer, so you're talking about July time,
Yeah.
you can get from any garden centre what's often called sort of spring summer lawn feed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's quite high in one of the three main plant nutrients, nitrogen, which is good for foliage, and obviously lawn grass is foliage.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't want to be using that after about July time. And what you need to do then is switch to an autumn lawn feed, which is quite high in potassium, phosphorus, which is good for the roots.
Okay.
Okay, because that then gets the lawn into a robust shape to get it through the winter when conditions are obviously a lot less amenable to grass.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Wow. I've never really thought about how much detail you can go into when you're sorting out grass. I mean, I haven't had great grass when we've had grass, but I have given it sort of a bit of a feed, but I've never really known the ins and outs of what you should do with it. It's other than, you know, it looks nice with stripes on it, but yes, it's quite detailed, isn't it? A lot of people get these companies called, is it Green Thumb, to come out. How do you rate them, or can people just do it themselves?
I've never used them. I mean, the basic principles of lawn care are quite straightforward
Hmm.
in that you need, so it depends on what type of soil you've got. So grasses have evolved to like light sandy soils, free draining. So if you've
Yes.
got that kind of soil, so for example, I've got some clients over in Morton in Marsh, they've got lovely light sandy soil.
Mm.
They've already cut their lawn 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And it's starting to look pretty good after
Hmm.
the sort of winter's ravages.
Yeah.
I've got very heavy clay here. I've not cut it at all yet
Hmm.
because if I put a mower on it, I'd basically just be ploughing it up.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that this week we will get a period of good dry weather.
Yes.
So come Easter weekend, I can get out there and give it its first cut.
Yes, we'll hear all the lawnmowers. I love hearing the lawnmowers actually, and smelling the cut grass is well, it's great for hay fever, not, but it certainly feels great to hear the lawnmowers
It's a
again.
sign of spring, isn't
It
it?
is, yeah, it really is. It really is. So with lawns, then, should you? I mean, is a petrol mower better or a fly mow, something like that? What kind of cuts the grass and mulches it up, or what kind of really does cut the top off nice and cleanly?
So the cop-out answer is it depends. It depends on the size of your lawn, primarily.
Yeah.
But also it depends on how sort of formal, in inverted commas, you want your lawn to look.
Okay.
So if you've got an area which is basically a playground for dogs, kids, etc., then investing in a very expensive mower that produces lovely stripes is an utter waste of your
Wasted.
money.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you may as well just get a fly mow that keeps the lawn, the grass down to a sensible height
Hmm.
and be done with it because that's the purpose of that lawn. If you've got
Yeah.
a lovely formal garden where the lawn is basically there to show off the plants around it,
Hmm.
then absolutely, you want to get those nice stripes, that
Yeah.
nice even cut. Yeah, get yourself a nice petrol mower.
It's probably got a
If
roller
you're
on it.
going for the formal look, then a cylinder mower is better than
Yeah.
a rotary. That
Right.
produces a much neater finish. But yeah, depending on how much money you got, go online
Well,
and
yes.
you can spend as much as you want.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
You can have all the
you've
gear,
also
but
you've
no
also
idea as
got
well.
sorry, you've also got increasingly now sort of automated mowers, so robot
Oh,
mowers.
yeah.
So you don't, if you wish, you don't even need to do it yourself. You can just set the robot up, and they look like sort of large beetles. Really, they're funny looking
Oh,
things.
okay.
And you'll have a sort of a charging hub set to the side of your lawn, where because they run on battery power.
Yeah.
So they're sort of programmed to know where home is. So they'll sit in there charging up, and then every day or every 2 days or whatever you set the timer at, it will scuttle out, zip round your lawn,
Well,
and then go back home again.
yeah. Well, what does it do with all the grass cuttings?
Well, the idea behind those ones, you can also buy sort of ones that you do yourself that are sometimes marketed as mulch mowers.
Mm.
So the idea is that if you cut the lawn very frequently, so every day, every 2 days,
Yes.
the grass has only grown a millimetre
Yeah.
or two in that period of time. So the actual clippings are very, very small, and
Yeah.
then they just go back into the lawn, rot down naturally, and fertilize the lawn
Yeah.
themselves. So you need to worry less about feed than if, like me, you're cutting your own lawn once a week,
Hmm.
or perhaps slightly less frequently.
Well, yeah. Doing
The
it
length of the
long.
clippings might be an
Yeah.
inch or two. Now, if you let that go back onto your lawn, you're basically just going to smother the grass and
Well,
do it no
yes.
good whatsoever.
Yeah,
So
and
you
then
need
it
to
doesn't
remove
look.
that, put it in
Yeah.
your green bin or on your compost heap, and
Got you.
away you go.
What about do you scarifying and aeration? Tell me a little bit about those, because I think I've seen lots of pictures recently. You can get a machine that can, is it just dig out little plugs or something like that? Is that a good thing to do?
So the idea behind those is, as I was mentioning earlier, it's looking after the soil beneath the grass. So a lot of lawn problems are to do with compaction.
Okay.
So it's basically people walking on the lawn,
Mm-hmm.
and the soil gets compacted, which basically means that the air spaces that exist in a healthy soil are squeezed out,
Yes.
which means that the roots on the grass find it much more difficult to do their job.
Mm-hmm.
And also, particularly if you've got a heavy clay soil, they get very waterlogged, which again does the roots on the grass no good whatsoever. So the idea behind aeration is that you basically just put holes into the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and that then sort of helps to decompact, if that's a word,
Create space.
the ground.
Yeah.
If you've got heavy clay soils, it's a good idea then to brush sand in, so that the sand then goes down the holes, and again helps to improve the structure of the soil, helps to improve what the roots of the grass have got to deal with.
Yeah. Should we have done it already, or is that something that we can be doing now?
You could, yeah. I mean, if you've not done it, it's better to do it now than not to do it at all.
Okay.
So the sort of traditional times for doing it are in the early spring, so sort of towards the beginning of March probably, and in the autumn, so kind of October time, after the grass has had its sort of summer battering and is sort of put in good condition for the winter.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you've not done it, it's better to do it in June, provided the ground isn't rock hard because you've had sort of 6 weeks of no rain, than not to do it at all.
Yeah, true. So any time's a good time, but preferably early spring, early March. Something.
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best time to do it. Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
Scarifying is slightly different. What scarifying is using a rake.
Yeah.
Or again, you can get sort of mechanical means to do this for you. What you're doing there is removing all the dead stuff that's accumulated on the surface of the soil, and again is getting in the way of that exchange of air between the roots of the plants and the atmosphere. So if you've got a blanket of dead grass, because like all plants, grasses have a life cycle. That lawn that's been there for 100 years, it's not the same plants that were there 100 years ago.
No, it won't be, will
it's the great God knows how many times down the line, sons, daughters of those original plants. So individual grass plants will die and fresh ones will take over, and that's the natural life cycle. So you've got to remove that dead stuff on a regular basis. Again, spring and autumn are the traditional times to do that. But if it's not been done, then any time is better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I would imagine diarising it wise, March and maybe September are probably quite good because they're March, April, May, June, July. Yeah, 6 months apart from each other. And then you've certainly got over the summer. Even if you get into sort of the Indian summers where it's nice and warm in September, it's still a good time to start putting it all to bed and making it a bit shipshape for the less warmer months.
Absolutely, it's interesting because my dad had a collection of old gardening books that his dad had collected back in the sort of 1910s, 1920s.
Oh, fab!
And you look at the suggested recommended timings of various jobs, and they're really quite different to what we would do now, because the gardening season was so much shorter 100 years ago than it is now. Probably got about an extra 6 weeks of actual gardening now compared to that time. Just how the climate has warmed. It's quite stark, actually. They weren't really doing very much at all until Easter, and pretty much packed up at the end of September, and that was it.
That is quite a difference. Do we have different plants that come over into this country now, though, that can cope with maybe the different? They can cope with sort of a colder spell in March or a cooler spell in September.
We do have a wider range of plants available. But I mean, it's interesting because we were still deadheading roses the week before Christmas.
Gracious me. Well, I have
Yeah.
noticed actually in this country, it tends to really be frosty, more so January and February, and up to December. You're still in the anticipation that the winter months really, well, okay, factually, winter starts on the 21st of December, but even so, you kind of expect it to be cooler January, February rather than up to Christmas. It can be relatively mild, actually.
Absolutely, and as I say, we were still deadheading roses up to Christmas, but we could always get caught out because I remember last spring. I mean, we all remember, the first lockdown spring as being absolutely glorious.
Yes, it
But
was.
there was quite a hard frost in the middle of May, and
Yeah.
that actually caused quite a lot of problems for plants, which had thought, right, summer's here,
Yes.
off we go, and then
Yes.
all of a sudden they
Yeah.
got clobbered by just one night of quite hard frost.
Yeah. Some
So
you see the
you need
blossom on the trees, you can kind of think, or the magnolia actually. Magnolias come out, and that's all of a sudden they're there, and then all of a sudden they've gone again because of some hostile weather moment, and then they've gone. Yeah, that's the thing.
Magnolias are glorious, but they don't last for very long, do
They
they?
don't, unfortunately. They kind of spend ages coming out, and the anticipation that they're going to look gorgeous is there. And then you get a few gusty days, and that's it. Everything's on the floor. Such a shame. Let's turn our attention to soils now. I suppose the first part of the show is going to be about preparation, making sure you've done all of the groundworks for the planting, etc. You've mentioned soils in that you've got clayey soils and sandy soils. Soils for soils for not rose beds, soils for borders and flower beds. That's it, not just rose beds, flower beds. Should you be trying to make it into a type of soil from what you've got with manures and chicken pellets and that kind of thing? How can we prepare it?
So whatever soil you've inherited, you can always improve it.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, the trick to improving any soil, whether it be at one end of the spectrum, almost pure sand.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up in Norfolk in the 1970s, we had what was pretty much a beach. It was
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
so sandy that we had to deal with that. When I was living up north, I had clay you can make pots out of. So the two ends of the extreme.
Yeah.
But the solution is pretty much the same, which is add organic matter.
Okay.
So you're talking composts, manures. Although if you're getting manure in, make sure it's been well rotted down, because
Okay.
otherwise it's full of ammonia and does your plants no good whatsoever.
Yes, that's true.
So if you've got sandy soils, the general idea is add the organic matter in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Because the problem, or one of the problems with sandy soils, is that nutrients wash out of sandy soils very easily.
Okay.
So if you put the compost manure down sort of earlier in the winter, by the time your plants are getting to start growing, most of those nutrients have been washed out.
Mm-hmm.
Although that said, the physical material of the compost is going to be doing your soil, providing bulk, etc., for your soil,
okay. Yeah.
and helping that way. But you've kind of missed out on half of the benefit, if you like.
Yeah, got
With
you.
clay soils, clays usually are actually quite full of nutrients. They're good soils in from that respect.
Mm-hmm.
It's the physical texture of them that is the
Yes.
problem. The fact that they don't
Break it up
drain
by
very
adding
well.
stuff.
So if you put the mulch down on top of the soil early in the winter, the weather and the worms will help work that into the soil over the winter. And by the time you get to the spring, then that's helped to improve that texture. But you kind of got to think on a multi-year sort of time frame for this. So it takes probably a good 5 to 10 years of putting a couple of inches of mulch on top of a clay soil every winter to start to get it into something that's decent. Sandy soils a lot quicker. You're almost on a yearly cycle there.
Okay.
With the sandy soil. But clay soils, you just need to be patient to help improve them.
Got you. I mean, it's difficult because with the clay soil, it's just to try and break it up is really, really difficult. So it's a real labour. But if you're going to be, I mean, who knows how long you're going to be living in a house, I suppose. So you've got to make sure. I mean, you might not be preparing it yourself for yourself. You're preparing it for the next people that will be coming along. But hey, even so,
Absolutely.
it's a good time to start to then make sure that you're setting the groundworks for things that you want to plant in them. So what kind of do you buy sort of the bags of John Innes, for example? Would you go to a garden centre and buy sort of the manures out of the big bags, or would you pick up a bag from the side of the road? Because I'm wondering, with what you're saying, whether the side of the road, bags manure £1.50 a bag or what have you, if that's going to do the trick, because it might be a bit fresh.
Yeah, certainly if you're buying manures that way, you want to be kind of basically know where it's come from.
Yeah. Okay.
Because two things really: has it been well rotted down?
Mhm.
Because as I say, fresh manure, full of ammonia, and will basically just burn off,
Yes.
delicate plant roots, etc. So you might as well just pour some battery acid over your garden and be done
Yeah.
with it.
Okay.
Than that. That's not great. The other thing you want to think about is what other chemicals, for want of a better word, general word, have been put on that ground that for example, cattle have been feeding on.
Okay.
Um, because a few years ago there was quite a problem with farmers applying certain herbicides to grazing land,
Oh.
which the cows were eating off of. Did
Yeah.
the cows no harm whatsoever,
No. Got you.
seemingly, but of course, all of that herbicide was going through the cow,
Coming out the other end.
undigested, coming out into the manure. So people were putting manure, buying manure, that had been prepared, for garden centres and the like. They were buying bags of manure from garden centres, putting it on their plants, and suddenly their plants were dying.
Yeah. Completely the
So,
aspect.
personally, I prefer to garden organically.
Okay.
So if I were buying manure, I would look to get it from an organic source, because then that it hasn't had various additives, etc.,
Mhm.
put in it. Yeah, and that can be for your own health as well as the health of the plants, because of course a lot of conventional agriculture, animals are given all sorts of drugs, etc., which again
Oh.
can come out into the manure. Now, obviously, on your ornamentals, that's no problem to you, but if you're putting that onto your fruit and veg
Yeah.
patch,
Yeah.
then potentially you've got the risk that some of those drugs are going to find their way into you.
Well, it makes
Um,
sense, doesn't it, really? I mean, if we're eating what we're feeding with bits and bobs that have got drugs in, or toxins, I suppose, and things like that, it might be absolutely fine for the fruit and veg to make it look all lovely and luscious, but when it transfers into us, it's not such a good thing. I like to buy organic where possible, because it does just feel better, and I think it's a more honest tasting um, item as well. So
yeah.
so when
So
it comes,
if I'm buying in bulk, so for most of my clients, because when you're mulching, you want to put on a good couple of inch thickness.
do you dig
Okay,
it in,
and
or do you just put it on top?
no, put it on the top. Let the weather and the worms do the job for you.
Okay.
So because the other aspect that you want to try and think about is sometimes it's necessary to dig. So
Yes.
we've just taken on a somewhat weed infested allotment. Okay, and realistically, we've got to dig over bits of it to get the nasty weeds out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we're going to be using that ground, in the next kind of 12-18 months, in theory, you could cover it in cardboard and let the weeds rot down under that cardboard, because they can no longer get the light.
Yeah.
But you've got we won't be able to use that ground till next spring. So
Okay.
if we want to grow anything this year, we've got to manually weed it, which involves kind of digging it over.
Yeah.
But
Even so,
if
you can never get rid of weeds. Weeds just keep cropping up. If there's a tiny bit of fruit left, it keeps cropping up. And if you're sticking manure on it, then the weeds either go, thanks very much.
absolutely, they've been very well designed by evolution to do their job, which
Yes.
is procreate like crazy,
Yeah,
but half
yeah.
a chance. But once you've got that soil dug over and de-weeded as best you can, then you're best off, digging it as little as possible, because that helps all the microorganisms in the soil to build up and do their job. So if you're going over it with a rotavator every year, essentially any worms or other sort of microorganisms in that top layer of soil are just going to get chopped to bits.
Okay.
And it's those microorganisms and the worms and the fungi that actually make your soil healthy.
Yes.
Which makes the plants healthy.
Yeah.
So the organic principle is look after the soil, and the soil will look after the plants.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, of course. Rather than rotivate. I mean, yeah, rotavating it almost seems like it's a natural thing to do, yet it's probably one of the harshest things to do.
It is. It's a boy thing.
Okay.
It's a boy thing. I've almost never seen a woman with a rotavator.
Well,
But
I fancy
a man with a rotavator is a happy man in a lot of cases.
Yes, okay, yeah. Rotavator in one hand, beer in the other hand.
Yes, and a visit to A&E afterwards, I would
Well,
imagine.
yeah, probably. Yeah, oh my God, yeah, probably. Didn't think that far ahead. Have another beer. So let's imagine we're talking to somebody who's got a flower bed or a bed. They want to plant it up, and they want a little bit. How would you scheme a flower bed? I mean, my thoughts are taller plants at the back, smaller plants at the front. And what would give you maximum impact that you would plant now for in a few weeks, and then things for in a few months? Do you keep buying throughout the year, or this is me actually, I buy probably everything in the next couple of weeks, stick it in, love it, love it, love it, it all grows up, and then you kind of see where spaces appear, because I haven't bought the right things, or I haven't bought mindfully, in that I want things to gradually open up over the summer season.
So there's a lot in there to unpack.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah.
So if the trick with any ornamental garden is to try and have it looking good throughout the year, and to have something of interest at any point through the year. So you're never going to have the whole thing looking spectacular for 12 months. But what you can do is make sure that there are a few plants correctly sort of positioned, so that it gives the impression that the whole thing is at its best for the full period of the year. So I would strongly suggest that anybody who wants to do that gets hold of this book, What Plant When, by the Royal Horticultural Society, and their website, rhs.co.uk, I think. If you put RHS into Google, it will come up. Is a superb resource for whatever garden question, etc., that you've got. But this book is brilliant, because it covers it splits the gardening year up into 4 seasons rather than 6 seasons rather than the traditional 4. So spring and summer are split into 2.
Yeah.
Okay. And it will show you what plants will look best at any particular point in the year. So you can then think, right, okay, yeah, I've got a bit of a gap in late summer, which is sometimes, sort of once you get July into August is often a sort of a relative lull, because all the spring, early summer stuff's gone over, and the sort of late summer, autumn stuff is yet to really kick off.
Yes.
So the other trick is get into the habit of visiting the garden centre every month. And just seeing what they've got that looks good at that particular time of the year.
Got you.
Because you're right that Easter weekend, lockdown being kind of partially released, garden centres are going to be mental this weekend.
Yeah, I actually feel like avoiding it. In fact, I will avoid. I don't like shopping at the best of time. Everything is done online shopping, but I do like going around a garden centre, and I do have my favourites as well. It's like a day out going around a garden centre.
They're great for inspirational, for getting ideas, because even sort of professional gardeners like myself, you're thinking, I'd completely forgotten about that plant.
Yeah.
You're thinking, oh yeah, that looks really good now, and you can kind of think, okay, yeah, I can put that in, wherever it happens to be. So you're trying to sort of make sure that there's something of interest in your garden for the 12 months of the year. So in winter, primarily that's going to be sort of structural plants.
Okay.
So it's either evergreens or sort of deciduous plants that have interesting bark textures, for instance. So things like the snake bark maple, for instance.
Okay.
Glorious colour in the autumn, but come the winter, when all the leaves have fallen off, the actual bark is a really interesting texture.
Okay.
And looks spectacular as a sort of a focal feature plant. They don't get too tall. They might get 4 meters tall. Eventually after 20 odd years. So even in a relatively small garden, they're going to be okay. The other thing you mentioned was the traditional idea of tall plants at the back, short stuff at the front. That sort of works, but the trouble then is that you can almost end up with your border just looking like a slope.
Yes, this is true.
The whole length of it then potentially looks quite dull. So what you can do is break that up by sticking a taller plant towards the front, and then you're kind of having to mentally look round the corner to see what's behind, and that can make it look a little less sort of forced and formal and Victorian, if you like.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
A lot of our sort of ideas about borders were kind of codified in the Victorian Edwardian times, and it's they're good ideas, but you sometimes need to just mix it up a bit to get it look a bit more interesting.
Somebody was saying that actually what you can do in a border is have the soil a bit lower down at the front and a bit higher at the back. So if you don't want all of the tall things at the back, you can just create the impression that it goes on a bit further back by having the soil, I don't know what angles, the soil go up a little bit at the back.
As a slope, yes, that can give you a similar effect, absolutely.
Got you. So you're out and about in lots of people's gardens at the moment. What is it that you're planting now? Because of course I can ask you what do you recommend here and there, but what is it that you're actually doing right now to give us some ideas of what we could be doing?
So I've got a couple of projects on the go which are sort of redeveloping borders in a couple of clients' gardens. So one's quite an established garden, but there's an area of it that's just got a bit tired. So we're kind of putting in. So there, I mean, it's quite a big garden. So this area that we're looking at is about 8 meters deep by about 30 meters long. So it's a good size. So we're putting in some fairly sort of large shrubs and trees that will grow up in that area. And then we'll put in sort of underplanting things like geranium, periwinkle, that will create a sort of a ground cover, again, to help keep the weeds down, but also give flower and interest during that period of the high summer when the shrubs have gone over, or in the case of things like hydrangea, haven't really kicked in yet. So that's one example. Another garden is a sort of much smaller. It was a new build about 3-4 years ago. As usual, the developers whacked in a load of very cheap stuff that actually isn't particularly well suited to the heavy clay soils up at Chippy, and so half of it's dying, and the other half isn't far behind it, probably by the looks of it. So we're taking all that out, and again replacing it with a mix of small tree. By small, I mean things that will get to about 4 meters,
Okay.
and shrubs that will get to a meter, meter and a half,
Hmm.
and again some more cottagey style sort of underplanting to again give that sort of interest throughout the 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting actually because when you plant, do you have? I mean, I do always look at the labels and I see that it likes sunny spot, full sun, partial shade, this and that, and I think, well, if I like it, I'll see if I can create that in a border that might get a lot of sunshine, give it a bit of shade. But I look at the sort of the height and the spread. Um, how long would you say it generally takes plants? I suppose it's quite plant specific. But if you're looking for a height and a spread of 1 meter by 1.5 meters, I wouldn't imagine it's going to be that summer, is it? It's going to be that in maybe 1, 2, 3 years time.
You're absolutely right. It is plant specific.
Yeah.
So the RHS website is very good for this because it will give you the height and spread of the plant and the time frame over which you would expect it to get to that.
Got you. Okay.
So yeah, if you're buying something that's going to turn into a medium-sized tree,
Hmm.
that time frame may be 20 to 50 years.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Gonna see it.
if you're buying something like a cardoon, for instance, which is a large thistle,
Hmm.
ornamental thistle, that will get to 2.5 meters over the space of a summer.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay, it'll die back again in the winter and
Yeah.
then come back the next spring.
Mm,
But
wow.
it you can almost physically see it growing.
Yes.
It will grow very quickly. So you're absolutely right. You've got to research your plant. So another plug for an RHS book. So
Plugs.
plants for places. If I can get
There we
that in
go.
the center of the picture.
Uh-huh.
Okay, because one of the sort of mantras of gardeners is right plant, right place.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, because you can try and create the right conditions for a plant, but that's often going to be quite a struggle. So, I mean, a good example would be if you like growing things like rhododendrons, camellias, azaleas,
Hmm.
which like acid soils.
Yes.
Okay. Now they like acid soils because the chemistry for them to be able to take up iron from the soil requires that soil to be acidic. If
Right.
it's the other way, if it's limey, that iron will not be able to be taken up from the soil.
Got you.
So the plant turns yellow and it really looks horrible. And
Yeah.
the
Okay.
plant's
It's tough,
poorly
isn't it?
and makes it clear. But you can create those conditions in a pot.
Okay, I was going to talk to you about pots actually.
And
Yeah.
that's the way to do it. If you haven't got in your soil, in the
Hmm.
ground, the right conditions, use pots.
Oh,
And you can put pots in the border.
yes, of course. I
you
was
know you,
thinking
you
cotton in
could sort
one.
of half
Yeah.
bury a pot
Yeah.
so that the top half of the pot is stuck up above ground and the bottom half is below ground.
Yeah.
Put the right, whether it be sandy
Yeah.
or acidic or because most of the soils in this part of the world, in the Cotswolds, are limey. The base
Yes.
rock is limestone, so unsurprisingly, the soils are basically crushed up limestone, so
Hmm.
it's quite limey. So if you want to grow camellias, etc., then you need to buy what's called an ericaceous compost, which is
Yep.
just a fancy word for acidic,
Yes.
and use that in pots, and your camellia is going to be as happy as Larry in there. So, and you can put that pot. You can buy some monster pots that are,
Yes.
a meter or more across. I mean,
And
and
do you keep them? Do you cut the bottom out? I suppose you don't cut the bottom out, otherwise the roots will start wanting to get fed from other means. But will it stunt their growth if they're kept in a pot?
it can do, but again, it depends on how big the plant wants to get
Yeah.
naturally, and also, most plants in pots will be happy enough, provided that you remember to water and feed them.
Yes.
You might have to sort of take them out of the pot and replace the compost. Every sort of 2 or 3 years, replace some of the compost, but that's not a big job if you really want to grow camellias in this part of the world, then that's kind of something you've got to take on board, because if you stick it in the border with limey soil, it's going to look rough in 12 months' time.
Yes,
If it's still alive.
One. I think camellias are beautiful, but yeah, when you get a suffering camellia, it's you can tell it from how it's supposed to look.
It's not a happy bunny, is it?
Yeah.
And it makes it quite obvious that it's not happy. So.
Yes. Now, when you buying plants can be a very pricey thing. I mean, plants can cost a fortune, and around here, I think we have got rather expensive garden centres. Are there ideas of doing from seed, growing from seed? Do we really have to have a greenhouse, polytunnel, and kind of, or do it all inside? I mean, you buy a packet of seeds, you could probably give everybody some in a village. Is it good to buy a good sized plant, or growing from seed? Is that something that's a lot cheaper? I suppose it is.
You can save yourself a lot of money by growing from seed, or learning to take cuttings is another good way of getting sort of free plants, if you like. So there's some brilliant tutorials online on how to take cuttings from various plants, and you can quite quickly build up your stock. There's some plants. I mean, lavender's a very popular plant in this neck of the woods. Very easy to take cuttings from. So in about a month's time, you can take cuttings. If you've got one lavender plant, or you've got a friend who's got a lavender plant that doesn't mind you sort of taking a few cuttings, and then by the end of the summer, you can easily have a dozen or more new plants. So that's a good way, if you are gardening on a budget, of increasing your stock of plants for relatively little outlay, except a bit of effort from yourself.
Pots and a bit of compost, and sort of learning to, well, not propagate, that's the wrong word, because that would mean from seed, wouldn't it? But learning how to nurture, I think.
Exactly.
I mean, I won't ask you how you take a cutting, because I suppose, is that quite plant specific?
Yes and no. I mean, there are some basic techniques. So let's talk about lavender. I haven't actually got one to hand here, which would be the clever way of doing it, wouldn't it? So I'll try and describe it. So you've got the fresh stalk of the lavender, so the fresh growth this year. So as I say, the best time to do that would be sort of towards the end of April into sort of early mid-May, when you've got that fresh new growth coming. So you want to snip it off just above where a pair of leaves are coming out of the stalk.
So you've literally got one thing of lavender with all the little bobbly bits on the top, and then you cut it above.
So it hasn't flowered by this stage.
Okay, no.
So what you're trying to get is the stalks that haven't got flowers on them.
Okay.
Complicated reasons to do with plant hormones, etc. But it's those stalks without plants. Cut it off just above a pair of leaves. Okay. And then once you've got your cutting separated from its parent plant, you cut the bottom off so that it's now just below the next pair of leaves.
Okay.
Because where those leaves come out of the stalk is where the roots are going to develop from.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's essentially, roots and leaves are the same biological structure. They just detect whether or not they can see light or not.
Yes,
above. If they can see light, I'm a leaf.
Yeah.
If they can't see light, I'm a root.
That's really
that's a very sort of entry level way of looking at it, but essentially that's what it is. And then you would put that cutting into a pot. Okay, make it quite a sort of a gritty mix of compost. So get some seed and cutting compost from the garden centre, or use another sort of multi-purpose type compost, but mix it up with a bit of sand to make it
give it room to spread,
more free draining. Keep it moist but not sopping wet, because otherwise it will rot off.
Yes.
Put it on a light windowsill, but not somewhere where it's going to get baked by the sun. And within a couple of months, it's developed roots. You can tell when it's developed roots because the top growth starts galloping away
Yeah.
because it's got something, is getting fed and watered quite happily. And once that's happened, you can put it in its own, pot it up, and as I said, by the end of the summer, you've got however many cuttings
Yeah.
you've able to take. Lavender is one of those plants that is very successful to take from cuttings. If you take a dozen cuttings, you consider yourself hard done by if you hadn't got sort of 8 or 9 good plants by the end
Oh,
of it.
okay. So
Some other
okay.
plants, are a lot less amenable to taking cuttings. And out of a dozen cuttings, you might be lucky to get sort of 2.
Oh, right. Okay.
But again, what's it cost you? Half an hour's time on a nice
Oh.
afternoon.
Well, that's the thing. I suppose we'll all be going around each other's gardens now, saying, "I'll have a little bit of that. I'll have a little bit of that, and a little bit of that, please."
Well, places like
Like
the
pick and
National
mix.
Trust, etc., can get a little bit narky if they find the visitors going around with a bag and a pair of secateurs helping themselves.
Yes, yeah, but almost though. Actually, you could imagine going to a garden centre where they have an array of these plants, and you could just take a little clipping. They could charge you for it. It's probably quite a good way of a good money spinner actually, charging.
I say I'm not really aware that I've tried that, but
No.
it's an interesting business idea. Yes.
Yeah, don't know where it would go with that though. And question for you. So when our plants are nice and lush and they're coming out looking beautiful, bug killers and such, how do we buy? I mean, can we home make our bug killer, or is it best to buy ready-made, which of course is going to be more expensive? But is there something in a bought one that really does do the trick versus a homemade one?
I think as an organic gardener, I would say don't would be my advice. Don't apply bug killers, etc. What you're looking for is to get a balance between pests and predators.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so aphids, green fly, black fly, are a classic garden pest. They also happen to be the most popular food for ladybird larvae and ladybirds. So the trouble is, if you start applying bug killers and the like, yes, you'll kill off whatever bugs happen to be on the plant at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
But you will also kill off the predators that would have fed on those bugs but are now going to starve to death.
Yes, yeah.
So when the next invasion of pests comes in, you've not got any predators around.
Yeah.
So that second invasion is going to be an awful lot worse. And you get yourself into a cycle of continuously having to apply pesticides. And it is expensive because you've got to buy this stuff.
Yes.
And it's just not good for the health of the garden. So if you're killing off the ladybirds and the ladybird larvae, what have the birds got to feed on?
God, yeah, okay, yeah.
So you've basically knackered the food chain.
Yes, yeah.
So it's much better. I mean, it takes a bit of patience and sort of confidence to say, I'm not going to kill off all those green fly.
Okay.
I'm going to wait for the pests to do the job, the predators to do the job for me.
Got you. You can buy ladybirds, can't you? You can buy.
You can. Actually. You can. Yes.
So that's a better way of doing it. I mean, my roses, I've got a lovely climbing rose at the side of the house. It's been tended to, so it's looking as though it's going to, do some delightful things. But I know within a matter of weeks, it's going to be covered. I mean, covered in green fly, and it's so disheartening when you see this. So my best bet would be to go and buy a tub of ladybirds.
Yep. If you're not, I mean, there do seem to be a lot of ladybirds around at the moment. So I think because we've had a relatively mild winter, more of them have made it through.
Yeah.
And so yes, we hopefully should have a good amount of predators there to help on the task. If you've got something that is really looking like it's gonna suffer, like your climbing rose, for instance.
Yeah.
As an organic gardener, you say, okay, you might, deal with 1 or 2 plants in a garden, and that's not going to completely destroy the food chain. What I would advise there, I mean, aphids the thing with aphids is that they breathe through their, I was going to say skin, but it's kind of like
Yeah.
scales.
Yeah.
So use your normal washing up liquid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a bowl of that, exactly as you would, the same strength as you do to clean your dishes.
Yeah.
And then just wipe that on the leaves and the stems of the plant. And what that basically will do is suffocate the aphids. So it
Yeah.
doesn't poison them as such, it
Okay.
just
Yes.
suffocates them because they can no longer breathe.
Yeah.
And it doesn't poison anything else that comes along, because the
Yeah.
problem with bug killers, etc., is they're poisons.
For bugs.
So
Yeah.
for bugs.
Yeah.
So the bugs that you want, the bug killer doesn't know the difference between an aphid, which you want shot of,
Yes.
and a butterfly, which you don't.
Okay.
So
True.
if you
Yeah.
apply
True.
bug killers, you, as well as knackering your food chain, you're also going to be killing off, the hoverfly, the bees, the
Yeah.
butterflies,
Yeah.
all of the insects that actually A, you like looking at, and
Yeah.
B,
Yeah.
help make your garden healthy.
Yes.
So, because a lot of the predators will be also be killed by these, insecticides, pesticides, as well. Whereas if you use the fairy liquid approach, it smothers the green fly that are on the plant
Mm-hmm.
at the time, but it won't poison, a bee or a butterfly that comes along 5 minutes later.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, actually, that is really good to know, even though I should, if I, probably thought about it or thought about it long enough, I'd probably come to that conclusion. But actually, I have bought bug sprays before because I thought, well, the best and the quickest way to nuke all of these green flies, but at the same time, you're nuking everything else as well. So a bit of ecover in a spray bottle. Bob's drunk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, nuke is probably the right word, because it's a bit like, I've got some weeds on my allotment, so I'll set off a nuclear device. Well, that'll deal with the weeds, but
Yes. Deal the weeds and
a
everything else.
bit of collateral damage in the process. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, neighbours. Yes.
But look at
Okay.
my lovely clear allotment.
Beautiful. There's no allotment left.
Yeah, smouldering crater. Yes.
Right. Let's just end because we're running on quite a lot. Actually, that's because there's loads to
Right.
completely go through. Let's just talk very slightly about if nobody's got gardens. Nobody. If people haven't got a garden and they like to grow a few little indoor plants. What about herbs and that kind of thing? Herbs for your windowsill. What would be the best variety to get maximum impact and actually be able to use them?
So the thing to think about there is, right, what are you actually going to use in your cooking?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've got very limited space, then you want to grow something that, as well as looking nice, has got a practical use to it.
Yeah.
So, it depends on what sort of cooking you're into. But say, for example, you want to make pesto.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, basil is the classic
Yes.
there.
Love
If
it.
you buy a little pot of basil from the supermarket, what you'll find is that there are a lot of individual plants in that,
Okay.
because the manufacturing sort of
Process.
process
Yeah.
is pot, compost, load of seeds go on top. This is all automated, and away it goes.
Yeah.
And what you end up with is a sort of 2-inch pot with a couple of dozen plants in it.
Oh, okay.
So those plants are going to have a relatively limited time,
Mm-hmm.
because they're all crammed in.
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
you take one of those pots and just gently sort of knock it out, and then tease the individual plants apart and plant each of those with a bit more space in a
Mm-hmm.
much bigger pot, then you're going to have a lot healthier crop of basil that you can crop, for several months.
Yes. Okay. That sounds.
Whereas if you leave it in that tiny little pot, you take one crop off and the plants are exhausted, so they're
Yeah.
unlikely to come
Doesn't
back.
anything. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find with that's good to know about basil. I use a lot of basil. But with things like coriander and parsley, I find that they grow up and then all of a sudden they just spread out and then that's it. They look a bit ropey, really. It's not
Yeah,
lack of watering either. I mean, you can overwater things, but I don't think I do, and they just don't seem to like it in my kitchen.
It's more that the the plant, as it has evolved, it's basically evolved to procreate.
Hmm.
It hasn't evolved to look nice. Yeah, the plant doesn't care what it looks like.
No, this is
So
true.
it just wants to set seed and get the next generation going. Thank you very much.
Got you.
So things like coriander, parsley, a lot of the herbs, if you see them in the wild, and most of them are Mediterranean type plants, so they're used to
Hmm.
growing in tough conditions.
Yeah.
Um, they don't look like much. They're
Yes.
scrappy looking things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and the chemicals that we are harvesting as herbs have evolved to basically kill off or deter pests so
Yeah.
that they don't get eaten. So it's chemical warfare essentially
Yes. Yeah.
from plant's perspective. So from our perspective as gardeners, stroke kitchen gardeners, we really need to treat those plants as annuals. So, get new plants each year, grow them from seed each year,
Got you.
because the
Yeah.
younger plant is going to look like something you want to see on your kitchen windowsill.
Okay.
Whereas the 2, 3, 4 year old plant is going to look like it's been neglected.
Yes. Just
Even if it hasn't,
yeah.
it's just going to look like that.
Yeah. Even if it's
Yeah,
loving
we
life.
all looked better when we were 18 than we do when we're 98.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's just the nature of aging.
Yes, this is true. Gracious me. Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining us. We could carry on talking about all of these sorts of things for a lot longer, which is making me think we have got a great placement to talk about gardens a bit more during the year, about what's
Happy to
going
do
on
so.
now, type of thing. That would be great, because it turns from the preparation for the spring, the summer season, into the maintenance of the summer season, and then we're going through into how to put your garden to bed, essentially around October, November time. So thank you so much. Now, if anybody wants to be in touch with Ian, Ian, is your email address iansmith369 at
So it's Ian.Smith
ian.smith?
369. Otherwise, there's some other poor person's getting a lot of
Two other
random
Ian
questions
Smith.
about gardening.
Yeah, I know two other Ian Smith. So it's
There's a lot of us.
ian.smith369. Is it at BT Internet?
That's it. Yeah.
I thought so. Okay, .com. So email Ian directly if you want to. Now, of course, the website for Ian and Amanda, actually, they do this together, is brennanSmithGardens.co.uk, and have a little look about what Ian does. Okay, the specialities. I'm certainly going to get you around my garden, and I'm going to talk to you afterwards about when you're available to come round, because we need a bit of nurturing outside.
No problem.
Yeah, but thank you so much. What I'll do, I will literally call you afterwards and organise you to come around my garden. But thank you. It's been it's been an education, to be quite honest. Some things I knew and so many things I didn't know. And it actually really does make you start thinking more about what we should be doing outside, especially when it comes, I think, to the organic side of things. How the plants have been produced, for the garden centres, and what we do with them when we get them home. But thank you.
A pleasure.
All right then. Thank you, Ian. I will speak to you
Bye now.
a bit. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right.
Fabulous. It is an education, actually, talking about all things garden. I know a bit of this, I know a bit of that, I know what's in my garden. But when it comes to preparing the soil, and what we should be doing to make sure it's a great habitat for our plants, it's not an easy job. And sometimes it's not as easy as just looking at the backs of the labels on the plants that we're buying, because, they don't know what our garden is like in particular. So it's worth doing all of the groundwork, literally, before you go to the garden centres, almost the scheming as well. So having a look at the Royal Horticultural Society websites, I think, is a very good idea, especially if you're starting to do your garden, or if you're looking at a bit of a garden redesign. I'm certainly looking at a garden redesign. We actually want to do some structural things in our garden, so it might be that I'll be thinking about things more than doing this year. But even so, I want it to be a nice space for when we get people around this summer, because we will be having people around this summer. Absolutely. I can't wait. Well, anyhow, we've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much for listening today. Do email me, kate@pinksaltshed.com, if you've got any questions for me or any ideas of what topics you'd like me to discuss. Of course, do subscribe to the show as well. Do subscribe to the channel on YouTube. That'd be fun. That'd be marvellous. So have a lovely Easter weekend. You're not going to see me next until Friday the 9th of April, when I am joined by Thomas Cameron, a singer from Devon. He's a tenor, and we're going to talk to him about his journey so far. He's in his early 20s, and what he's been doing, what he's been up to over the last year, and how we will be able to see a little bit more of him out and about. All right, I might upload a few things to YouTube in the meantime. That's if I'm feeling creative. But until then, have a lovely, lovely Easter break. Don't eat too many chocolate bunnies, all right, or normal bunnies. But enjoy yourselves, and hopefully we'll all be seeing a few little friends and family. Take care. See you soon.